Namaskar, respected Chairperson Sanmatanandra ji, my co-speaker Dr. Ghosh and Dr. Laha, and esteemed audience present in this August House. I have been allotted 15 minutes of time and I will try to be punctual. And I will be discussing the topic through India's 5 literary ages as envisaged by Maharishi Sri Aurobindo. So let me begin. Portraying the role of spiritualism through literary aesthetics is not only a challenging topic, it is indeed very, very complex too. For the 3 distinct things, the spirituality, the literature, and the aesthetics have been combined here together to form a single topic. What do you exactly mean by portraying the role of spiritualism through literary aesthetics? When a literature becomes an expression of aesthetics, I would be attempting to have only a glimpse of the topic through the lens of Sri Aurobindo. Literature is in essence an artistic creative expression. Sri Aurobindo says that the primary use of art is purely aesthetic. Its secondary use is intellectual or educative, while the third and the highest is spiritual. Although literature is an art, yet there exist certain distinctive differences between it and the other forms of art. According to Sri Aurobindo, all arts appeal to the soul through the eye. They arrive at a peculiarly concentrated expression of the spirit through the aesthesis and the creative mind of a people. But instead of peculiarly concentrated expression as stated above, if we seek for its most flexible and many-sided self-expression, we must then look at the literature. For it is the word that carries the shades and turns and teeming significances of inner self most subtly and variably in its manifestation with its power of clear figure or its traits of suggestion. Moreover, in India, we come across another clear distinction between the literature and the other forms of art. Sri Aurobindo says that the Indian architecture, painting, sculpture are intimately one in inspiration with the central things in Indian philosophy, religion, yoga, and culture. Indian arts could even be interpreted as a specially intense expression of their significances. In fact, Indian arts have been always largely a hieratic aesthetic script of India's spiritual, contemplative, and religious experiences. But this cannot be said of all Indian literature, for there is much in Indian literature which can be well appreciated without any deep entry into India's spiritual, contemplative, and religious experiences. Let us define first what spirituality is all about. According to Sri Aurobindo, high intellectuality, idealism, ethical turn of mind, moral purity, and austerity, religiosity, ardent and excellent, exalted emotional fervor, mental belief, creed or faith, and emotional aspiration, a regulation of conduct according to a religious or ethical formula are of considerable value to mind, life, and even to the spiritual evolution itself as preparatory movements. But they still belong to the mental evolution. The beginning of a spiritual realization, experience, or sense is not yet there. But then what is spirituality? Let me quote here again Mahayogi Sri Aurobindo. Quote unquote, spirituality is in essence an awakening to the inner reality of our being, to a spirit, self, soul, which is other than our mind, life, and body. An inner aspiration to know, to feel, to be there, to enter into contact with the greater reality beyond and pervading the universe which inhabits also our own being, to be in communion with it and union with it, and a turning, a conversion, a transformation of our whole being as a result of the aspiration, the contact, the union, a growth or walking into a new becoming or new being, a new self, a new nature, unquote. A literature, when a literature becomes an expression of aesthetics, let us discuss the issue in the light of the clues given by Sri Aurobindo somewhat in a different context. The three things, the greatness and worth of its substance, the value of its thought, and the beauty of its form, together make a literature an expression of aesthetics. Moreover, if it avails to bring out and raise the soul and life or the living and the ideal of a people and age, a culture, satisfying the highest conditions of the art of speech, it then becomes an expression of the highest literary aesthetics. It is to be noted that art, poetry, literature are together one of the three fundamental aspects that are associated with or constitute the culture of a people. Literature is the side of the culture which is characterized by the creative self-expression and the appreciative aesthesis, intelligence, and imagination of the collective consciousness of a people. It is the creative expression and impression of intuition, imagination, vital turn, and creative intelligence of a people. Not therefore by literature alone, how the culture of a people as a whole helps portray the role of spiritualism can be seen in the 5 progressive aims of culture as enumerated by Sri Aurobindo. He says, the lifting of man up to something which at first he is not is the whole aim of a great culture, of which art, poetry, and literature are integral parts. The great culture at first must lead him to knowledge, for he starts from an unfathomable ignorance. Thereafter it must teach him to live by his reason, for he lives much more by unreason. It has to teach him next to live by the law of good and unity, for he is at present full of evil and discord. A great culture of a people must teach him to live by a law of beauty and harmony, for his actual life is a repulsive model of ugliness and jarring barbarism. Finally, a great culture must teach him to live by some high law of his spirit, for not only is he now egoistic, he is at present engrossed too by the needs and desires of his physical being. This perhaps is the reason behind as to why Bhartrihari in his magnum opus, the Niti Sakakam, so emphatically reveals that Sahitya Sangita Kala Vihina Saksat Pasu Pusya Visana Hina Trinang Nakhadanopi Jivamana Tat Bhagadayang Paranang Pasunam. A spiritual aspiration has always been the characteristics, ideal, and the governing force of Indian culture, its core of thought and its ruling passion. The whole root of difference that exists between Indian and European culture springs from this spiritual aim of Indian culture. Let us therefore look at the evolutionary journey of Indian literature since the inception of the Vedic vision through the different ages of our history, so that we can have a glimpse of the portrayal of the role of spiritualism through her literary aesthetics. At this point, I would like to refer to Sri Aurobindo's one of the revealing statements on India. He says, quote unquote, her first period was luminous with the discovery of the spirits. Her second completed the discovery of dharma. Her third elaborated into detail the first simpler formation of the Shastra, but none was exclusive. The three elements are always present. Sri Aurobindo therefore sums up this first age of India's spiritual greatness as follows, quote unquote, the first age of India's greatness was a spiritual age when he sought passionately for the truth of existence through the intuitive mind and through an inner experience and interpretation both of the psychic and the physical existence. After the age of the spirit, the age of the dharma, after the Veda and Upanishads, the heroic centuries of actions and social formations, typal construction, and thought and philosophy, when the outward forms of Indian life and culture were fixed in their large lines, and even their later developments were being determined in the seed. Thereafter, the great classical age of Sanskrit culture was the flowering of this intellectuality into curiosity of details in the refinements of scholarship, science, art, literature, politics, sociology, mundane life. Then Maharishi says it was these two strains. He was referring to the Purana and the Tantra. It was these two strains which, mixing together and soon becoming a single whole, proved to be the most living and enduring movements of the classical age, had the most abiding result in the minds of the spirit, were the creative force, and made the most conspicuous part of the later popular literature. Therefore, in the post-classical period, we see a lifting up of the whole lower life and impressing of the values of the spirit upon it. Sri Aurobindo sums up this post-classical age as follows. He says, quote unquote, "This was the sense of the Puranic and Tantric system and the religions of Bhakti." He says the Puranas are essentially a true religious poetry and art of aesthetic presentation of religious truth. Later Vaishnavism, according to Sri Aurobindo, took up the aesthetic, emotional and sensuous being and attempted to lift it up for the service of the spiritual. He says this later Vaishnavism was the last fine flower of the Indian spirit. Sri Aurobindo sums up finally the literary journey of Indian mind since the inception of Veda and the Upanishads in the following word. He says, later Vaishnavism, the last fine flower of the Indian spirit, was in its essence the taking up of the aesthetic, emotional and sensuous being into the service of the spiritual. It completed the curve of the cycle. Therefore, thereafter, another stage of Indian history began which demands our engrossing attention. We will not be referring to this period of our history today. With these few words, I would like to conclude here. Thank you, and my gratitude to the ISCS. Thank you.